Hey everyone, so this one's kind of interesting because I'm going to cover some functionality that I don't think I ever have before. So let's quickly run what we've added and then we'll go through the coding. So we'll run this, and what you can do now is you can now enter a name for the meal because up to this point you've assembled the sandwich, you click on add to menu and then it disappears. We had the coding so as that would unlock the classes and unlock those meals, but the actual name was not showing up on the menu. So what we do now is say we assemble a sandwich, and it really doesn't matter because the name that you can type, you can call it whatever you want. All right. So that looks like a bacon burger to me. So it says enter meal name. We'll type bacon burger. And then we click on add to menu. So before this wasn't here, you would just click on add to menu. We click on add to menu, and sure enough, what you typed now shows up on the menu. This is getting saved to a static array. So that means it's now permanent, that every time the scene runs, it will have a running, everything that you've been added will be here. The only thing we haven't done yet with this is we haven't created a save file. So if I were to stop and then start again, this would be gone. So there's no save file system, but that's across the board. We're not saving anything yet. But that's the first step, is that you have a static variable, and so that will now be unchanging as long as the application is running. So again, at a certain point, probably it will be one of the last things that I do is we'll add a file save, but it's effectively permanent as long as the application keeps running. So that's the main addition, is that you can now name what you've done. So the functionality was already in place that by creating a menu item, it unlocked the classes. They would show up and they would order that food, but you didn't have a running tally here so you know what you have on the menu. Because what's probably going to happen is as a gameplay mechanic, you're probably going to only add so many menu items at once. Like on week one, you can only have 3 items. And then week two, you can add one more, and then one more, and one more. And that's kind of like how you have to do in like how in RPGs you tend to have some kind of inventory management. Well, in this case, you can only have just so many meals at a time, or else it'd be easy mode. You could just come up with every conceivable variation that you can think of. So that will be one of the limitations, as far as that you have to come up with unique meals and you can only have just so many menu items at a time. Okay, so that's the functionality. As you can see, this has been spruced up a bit too. I've just dragged in a few more of the objects from the cafe package. I don't think you guys need to see me drag and drop things into the screen, into the scene. So that is the new functionality. Now let's look to see how it works. No real great way to go at this because the code kind of points at each other, but a couple new things have been added. So here, see these dashes? This is a Text Mesh Pro object, okay? So what's happening is when you type into that field and you hit add to menu, the text for this object is being modified. So that's one of the new objects that have been added to the scene. The other is if we zoom out to the canvas, there's now a UI level, which there was not before. And it's not a big deal. As soon as you add your first UI level, it'll add the canvas, it'll add the event system, so don't get intimidated by that. So game object UI, as soon as you add your first one, it creates the canvas, creates the event system. So in this case, this is Input Field Text Mesh Pro. Now this brings up an important point. There's a difference between a 3D text mesh object that's in the 3D space and a 2D text mesh pro UI object, and the coding is different. So that's another reason why I think this is a useful tutorial. Okay, so we added this object. We added the text mesh pro on the clipboard. I think those are the two only objects that functionally matter. Obviously there's some things in the background that don't. And what we've done now is if we zoom back in, so if we go to our clipboard, I added an unused script to this. I believe in another video I had showed you this script, menu flow, and we weren't doing anything with it. Now we are. You can use whatever script you want. I'm using that's just one that I'd created and never did anything with. So let's go ahead and start with that. So menu flow is attached to the clipboard object. And there's two things, public static string menu meal value equals. So this is the actual value that we want to be displayed in the text of the Text Mesh Pro. So we want a value to be put into that field. So we need to store it. And again, it needs to be static, so it's unchanging. And then public text mesh pro, this is also an array. Okay, so public text mesh pro, an array, and it's meal name text. So this is going to be the actual objects. So this is the value for the string that's going to go into the text mesh pro object. This is the actual text mesh pro object. Because this is public, you can drag and drop the object into the scene. So once you add those two and then click save, you'll see that this will show up. You need to add elements because it starts with 0. And then this is just where you drag the Text Mesh Pro object. And in this case, it's that object. Now I want to call it something. First of all, for this to work, you need to type using TM Pro. If you're not using that namespace, it won't know what you're talking about. So it won't understand this if you don't do this. Second of all, I want to distinguish between Text Mesh Pro and Text Mesh Pro UGUI. So here this says Text Mesh Pro. So this is a 3D, this is a Text Mesh Pro object that's actually in the 3D space, as opposed to a Text Mesh Pro object that's in the UI, which is a 2D space. And you'll see how the coding is slightly different, and yes, it makes a difference. So you created your static string, you created the Text Mesh Pro object, and now you just need to have one be modified by the other. So in the update section, so with every frame, we're going to say take text mesh meal name text 0, so the one in the 0 position because it's the first one at the top, dot text. So we're modifying the text portion of this Text Mesh Pro object. We're going to put in meal value name. In other words, we're going to take this value and drop it into the first position here, which you can see over here in the inspector. And then the way that this gets modified, so we're saying, okay, these values are going to be dropped into here, because eventually this won't be a constant, because you're going to have, say, 10 menu items, so all 10 need to be set up. So menu name text 0, menu name text 1, menu name text 2, okay? So eventually there's going to be like a for statement here, some kind of loop where I cycle through all of the available ones to make sure they're all updated. So this value is getting added to the corresponding text mesh object. But how does this value get changed? Well, that's with text buttons. So this script is attached to this object. Okay, so we already had the script attached. So if you look at this object here, we have the text button script. And here we also had to, again, add using Text Mesh Pro. And this is what I was talking about, Text Mesh Pro UGUI. It makes a difference because I'm creating a link to a UI version of a Text Mesh Pro object. And this got me stuck for the longest time until I did a little research and found out what was going on. So that's the difference. If it's a 3D Text Mesh Pro object in the 3D scene, it's Text Mesh Pro. If it's a GUI object in the UI level, then you have to make sure you use Text Mesh Pro UGUI. Same namespace, different type. Okay, so entered name. So this is referring to this object, specifically this. So when you create that input field, so you go to game object, you go to UI, and you go to input field Text Mesh Pro, okay, that's what created the type box. For the purposes of this, we care about two things. One, we care about the text field. The text field is where you are actually going to type right here. So you're not typing in the inspector, of course. You're going to be typing on the screen, but this is the actual field that is being modified. This is the default text that shows up giving instructions to the user. So I think by default it says enter text. So I modified it so it says enter meal name. So those are the two things that we really care about this object. The text object, because that's where we're going to grab the value from, and then the placeholder object, so you're giving good instructions to your the game player, the end user. Okay, so now the data entry itself doesn't require any coding. So I can take, let me just, so we'll go UI, input field text mesh pro, and I run this. See, it's down here. You can already type, okay? So that does not require any coding. Okay. So that's why you don't see me talk about any kind of script. That is built-in functionality. It's one of the few things that I actually like about the UI in Unity. Okay, so what this says, so this script is, again, it's attached to a few objects. It's attached to the reset. It's attached to add to menu. So if you click on an object that the script is attached to, and the name of that object is add to menu, a few things happen. We already reviewed these in another video, so I'm not going to review them again. The only new thing that has been added is this one, menu flow. We talked about that in a second ago. That's right here. Menu flow dot menu meal value 0. The first one equals entered name dot text. So again, entered name refers to this object right here because we created this linkage to it. So it's saying take this object, extract the text from it, and drop it into this field, this array, excuse me. And as we said, this array is static. So you're making a permanent change to that field. Eventually, we might give you the ability to delete menu items, but that's really way down the road, and I probably won't even cover that. And that's about it. I think that covers the functionality. So you're creating awareness between this and this here. So you're saying grab that value, save it to a static variable that is declared on this object with its script. This script then takes that value and applies it to this object here. So you kind of have this link, you kind of have this chain of events. You type into a field, a click on a button grabs that value, saves it to an array, and then another script takes that value from the array and saves it to another TextMesh Pro object. So you're basically taking a value and you're just handing it off a couple times. Is there a cleaner, easier way to do it? Possibly, but I think that this is fairly solid. Okay, so I think that's about it. Yeah, so that's what we've added. As you can see, we dragged and dropped a few more things into the scene from the cafe. And yeah, so I'll see what is next. I'm getting to the point where really all the functionality will be in place, and then it's just a matter of choosing a publisher for the characters, the warriors, the mages, the heroes. Because right now the stuff I'm using I think is pretty much placeholder because I kind of want to buy all the assets from the same publisher so we have a consistent appearance. There's one that I thought I was going to use, but unfortunately, there seems to be an issue that animations from Mixamo just don't work. I import the model into Mixamo, I add an animation, it looks great in Mixamo, I bring the animation back to Unity, and the model just wobbles around. It doesn't actually animate properly. I contacted the publisher, and they said they're willing to work with me to try to figure out what's wrong. I'm not sure what to tell them. It looks right in Mixamo, but doesn't look right in Unity, and I've animated many other objects in Unity using Mixamo. So there's something up with the models. So we'll see if we can work that out. If not, I'll just find a different vendor. There's plenty of publishers who make hero classes and hero type characters for RPGs and MMOs and that kind of thing. Okay, so oh yeah, and so for the title I mentioned it wasn't meant to be clickbaity, but as far as onions reducing aggro, again, we're not going to actually see the combat or anything like that. But as you can see, I've added aggro here as one of the stats. And just as you add plus signs, you can add negative signs because, again, those pluses and minuses don't actually do anything other than unlocking the class. So maybe this would be for a healer class because healers tend to get a lot of aggro when they heal a warrior. So maybe to get like a really elite healer, you're not just giving something that does a lot of MP, you also want to reduce aggro. So rather than plus signs, it would be negative signs. That's all. Okay, so that should about do it. I hope you found this interesting and please do enjoy the rest of your day.